Celebrate the incredible women transforming the game of cricket. Metrobank are proud to honour three amazing leaders through the Metrobank Champion of Girls Cricket Award, from Anna Davies at Chichester Priory Park Cricket Club to Emma Williams at Ammanford Cricket Club and Sarah John at Sefton Park CC. These women are accelerating action and driving gender equality forward. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. It's a historic week for the women's game in England with a very fun start to the Tier 1 county system. The World Cup qualifier in Pakistan came to a thrilling end, but as it concludes, we ask what comes next for the nations that did not qualify for the 8-team event in India later in the year. I'm Rana, and with me in part 3 is Ben Gardner. First up, we have an interview with Steve Snell, the head of performance at Cricket Scotland, about Scotland's run in the qualifier. Had their game against Ireland gone slightly differently, they would have made the 8-team World Cup later this year. Their fixture list, though, is now bare without World Cup qualification, and their finances as an associate nation are not in a strong position. Here is Snell on Scotland's predicament. We're really pleased to be joined by the head of performance at Cricket Scotland, Steve Snell. Steve, thanks for joining us. We're speaking 5 days after the end of the qualifier. Scotland just missed out on qualification for the 8-team World Cup in India later this year. What are your reflections on the tournament? Really competitive and Scotland very, very close to making the top 2.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for having me on. I think that the reflections on the tournament really are in a multitude of ways. I think the first one is pride in terms of the quality, resilience and effort that the team showed in what was a really kind of challenging tournament against challenging teams. And not only that, the backdrop to the tournament was that, we had kind of scant information, prior to the tournament. It really hindered our preparations, and we had to, at the very last minute, get our players on a camp and then together. And given the fact that the players hadn't played any international ODI cricket since last August, to go straight into that tournament and beat the West Indies as we did, I thought was a phenomenal achievement, given the kind of, the lack of playing time. Equally, that being said, the game's coming so thick and fast. It was pretty much play, day off play throughout the tournament, off the back of no cricket. That's extremely challenging for any team, and not as much as us, the team that haven't been playing. So it wasn't a surprise really as the tournament progressed that our general kind of level of output in terms of performance as a team diminished somewhat in terms of results, but there was still a hell of a amount of quality on the pitch in terms of some of the performances. So definitely a mixture of pride and then ultimately disappointment as we haven't qualified for the World Cup. But we did beat the West Indies. We had 2 extremely challenging games against Pakistan and Bangladesh, and then we narrowly lost to Ireland, obviously, when we had an eye on the net run rate in that game as well. So yeah, definitely a mixture of emotions, but ultimately we have to be kind of very satisfied in terms of how the team played.
From a prep point of view, there's getting over the hurdle of not playing a lot of 50-over cricket together as a team, but there's also getting used to conditions that I'm sure that the Scotland players wouldn't have been particularly used to. A World Cup qualifier in Pakistan, and also on a more broader theme, this winter, the 2 biggest events for Scottish women's cricket have been in Asia. How difficult is it to acclimatise to conditions where the players probably don't have a huge amount of experience in?
Yeah, I think it's a balance. Sort of, you can prepare for these conditions, but equally you kind of need to be supported by that in terms of general kind of fairness, I guess. The T20 World Cup, I think we had 3 day games in the kind of 40-degree heat. We were the only team in the competition to do that. I'm not quite sure in terms of why that was the case. Of course, we raised that at the time. And then if we come to the time of year that we're playing these games, we seem to be playing on the subcontinent at general kind of peak times of heat-wise, etc. And again, I don't know why that is, from a condition perspective. So it certainly doesn't play to our advantages in terms of the climate that we're used to playing. We have tried to remedy this by having kind of camps in Dubai prior to the series, but ultimately there's huge cost implications for that as well, and obviously we can't do that as much as we'd like, so we have to kind of almost piggyback that off at the front of competitions, which then inadvertently creates kind of really long tours for us as well. So it has been challenging in terms of to prepare for the series, but equally we have now spent a reasonable amount of time over the last 18 months, in those conditions. So the players do know what to expect, and certainly I think we're getting much better in terms of preparing for those individually and collectively in terms of nutrition and all those other pre-match elements that you kind of need to take into consideration. But still, that if I always believe you've got to prepare to play your best game, go out there and bat for 50 overs and bowl 10 overs, for example, if you're Catherine Bryce, and I think those key performers, the level of fitness that they're showing and ability to adapt conditions are why they're some of the best players in the world.
Obviously, from a performance point of view, it must be very disappointing for the players to narrowly miss out on a World Cup. From a financial point of view, how big a deal is it for Scotland to qualify for an 8-team World Cup? Is that quite a big deal off the pitch as well as on the pitch?
Yeah, there's huge cause and effect in terms of the cricket we play, and one of the I guess the areas before I came into the role I probably hadn't considered. I knew there was jeopardy, but quite how much jeopardy in terms of the matches and the tournament qualification. It has so much swing in terms of our preparation. So, for example, had we qualified for the World Cup, ultimately that would have meant that we do get a substantial amount of a qualification grant from the ICC, which essentially lends itself to giving the players a slight kickback for doing well, but then ultimately funding more cricket. So we would do something before the series in India, and we would likely host a four-member nation this summer in terms of some either ODI or T20 cricket, which we have the option to do. And I'm more than happy to share that Pakistan are really keen to come across this summer. The net result of us not qualifying is we can't afford to do any of those things, so there won't be a series against Pakistan this end of July. We can't afford to host them, which sounds absolutely bonkers, but we can't. And then obviously we won't be going to the World Cup, and we won't be having a series prior to that. So the net result then is that's three huge events that don't take place as a result of the non-qualification. And what do we have in their place? Well, we can't afford to do anything. So, all that good work, all those performances I've spoke about, all the endeavour, all the improvement, it's almost like, well, where does that go? We can't afford to invest in that cricket this summer. So it's almost like the players then go into another period of hiatus through, I say, no fault of their own. They've performed well in terms of the World Cup qualifiers. And that's where I think that the game has, really has to look at itself in the mirror in terms of actually how the game is progressing from a development perspective, from a fairness perspective, but also from a quality perspective. Otherwise, the equilibrium of the game will just remain the same. They won't have the kind of challenger teams like ourselves, having big results with a lack of resources without actually having the opportunity to play the game. And it's something I find really frustrating. And I think you alluded to it at the start of the podcast, where I don't think there's a huge amount of understanding in terms of actually the disparity between the financial means that I guess associate members such as ourselves, and I really dislike that term, associate members. I don't understand why there's associate members and full members. Most other sports seem to be able to coexist. So that the fact that we're an associate member, we're getting millions and tens of millions of pounds less than other teams, and that we're still able to compete and beat teams at that level, yet then still expected to continue to do that without further investment. I find that hard to believe that's in the best interests of the global game.
To a lot of people, when they hear full member status, they will view that through the lens of, does your men's team play Test cricket? Basically, that's historically how it's been viewed, probably among more casual cricket fans. But practically and financially, how big a difference is there from being a full member nation and not a full member nation from a funding point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I'll get corrected on the numbers, and I'm sure sort of our finance team will step in. But my understanding is at least about 15 million, potentially more. But again, my understanding of that numbers is more from a performance based. There's lots of other things as well that kind of come whether it's development, participation, all the other kind of elements of what it takes to run a governing body. But we're talking kind of millions of pounds or dollars. And I guess the net effect of that is the elements of programs which other four-member teams will run as a matter of course, such as 18 programs, extensive under 19 programs. Even we're talking about fixtures here. That's a small part of this. There's all those other elements. There's core programming, which exist underneath, whether it's making sure there's clear kind of education programs in place for players, looking after player welfare. All our players at tournaments, they're sharing rooms. How does that marry up with player welfare in terms of which, has been championed across the game? I know for a fact that all the, I guess, four-member nations, their players aren't sharing rooms when they're on tour, and it does have a big impact in terms of that, social psych element for the players. So there's just so many things that extra funding would bring in for us, and we haven't even bridged the topic of the facilities in Scotland. Our players are unable to access facilities during the day. We share our facilities, our high performance centre. We share that with a school organisation. So our players are training on Sunday afternoons, Monday evenings, Wednesday evenings. That isn't high performance. That's an abridged high performance. And, we really need to get to a stage where, our performances on the field are being mirrored off the field in terms of the investment that we're receiving, not just from external sources. We're looking to make sure that we're our own investment. For commercial partners, we're trying to be as proactive as we can with that. We've had some real challenges off the field which have hindered people wanting to come on board as commercial partners, despite the success of the team on the field. But those ability to invest in our facilities, not just for now, but for the future. We've got the 2030 World Cup on the horizon, and that's from that legacy of Scottish cricket, not just for now, but for the future. We really need that support from local partners and indeed the Scottish government. I think I've seen some really good initiatives that have been taken place. I think the Namibian government and indeed the Irish government have been extremely proactive and collaborative in ensuring that top class facilities and high performance centres are now available for those players and their respective teams. What will happen if we're unable to invest and improve our facilities indoors and outdoors? Obviously, that gap just becomes wider, and our ability to compete will diminish as a result of our lack of access to world-class facilities. So, coming back to the kind of question about funding, it isn't just about fixtures. It's about the far bigger piece in terms of legacy, development, high performance, access for people to watch Scotland play cricket at home. There's so many things that we could do with more resources, and if we don't get them, what we're actually achieving on the field at the moment, I would suggest, is way more than the sum of our parts.
Obviously, the men's 50 over World Cup gets a lot of criticism for being only 10 teams. The women's 50 over World Cup is only 8 teams. We have a side in West Indies who were one of the genuine contenders for a T20 World Cup 6 months ago. They will not be at the 50 over World Cup down the line. And I know that a lot of what you're talking about is a bigger, more permanent funding question, really. But what would have been helpful in the short term would have been World Cup qualification. How frustrating is it that it's an 8-team event when this qualifier literally showed that level of team between 7 and 12 and 13 in the ranking is really competitive?
Yeah, I think whenever you miss out, it's always frustrating. I think that's one thing for sure. So trying to almost kind of separate the emotion from the rationale. But I agree in terms of with almost the premise of why does the rationale exist for an 8-team World Cup if the quality is there for a larger one? I do except that 50 over World Cup from a scheduling perspective is difficult in terms of the amount of matches. Again, looking, TV broadcasting, player welfare, ensuring that the tournament is a really good product to view. But if you've got some really good teams that aren't there, I don't think that enhances the product or the storytelling of that tournament. So I think it is frustrating that it is an 8-team tournament. It shows just how much quality there is that teams such as ourselves, West Indies and Ireland, Zimbabwe weren't even in even in the mix to qualify for the World Cup. They didn't qualify as a result of their ranking, and they are a full member and receiving obviously way more funding than ourselves. So I think it just highlights the fact that it's a very narrow tournament, but it could and probably should be broader.
What's next for the team? So if you're a Scotland player at the moment and you don't have a county contract for the 2025 summer, what does your summer of cricket look like?
Yeah, it kind of galls me to say it, but it's pretty sparse in terms of that. And I think we're doing our best to make sure we've got A-team cricket and training programs in place. We will be hosting regional cricket in August for our women's teams, which is a three-match series in terms of effectively splitting up the kind of the best players in terms of in Scotland to play against each other over a three-match series. But from an international perspective, it's very, very sparse, and that's purely down to funding and obviously that lack of future tours program, which doesn't exist in terms of for women's cricket, and certainly in terms of at the level that we're playing at the moment, we're not dining at the top table of full members, and as such, our diary and our calendar reflects that.
And finally, a more general question: do you think that cricket and international cricket in particular needs to be and should be more collaborative? It feels like everything's almost siloed off at the moment, and we're talking about money and there being enough money to host series and provide all the programs that you want to have in an ideal world. We know that cricket has loads of money at the moment, so it's not as if this is a game overall that's short on cash. It's just the distribution of it is not equitable at all.
Yeah, I think one of the narratives from the ICC is about growing the game. We've seen the kind of intent to do that in America, and I think there's some other stories in terms of Uganda at the men's World Cup in Tanzania, I think recently qualifying, I think the under-19s. There's some fantastic stories in terms of how the game is flourishing in areas where historically it hasn't been prevalent. And I do think, obviously Test cricket quite rightly has, driven the commerce of the game for a long period of time. And with the IPL and other kind of marquee franchise tournaments coming in, that has kind of shifted the kind of tectonic plates in terms of what's important in or deemed important in the global sphere. But I think my view is that everybody has a place, and I think international cricket is extremely important in almost being the pinnacle of the game. I think the franchise cricket doesn't exist without the very best players playing. How the very best players identified, well, they're the players that have either succeeded consistently in international cricket, are currently playing it, or have done so successfully in the past. So international cricket and being that pinnacle for players has got its place, definitely. As such, the ability to expand on what has been, a fairly kind of niche amount of teams surely has to be in the interest of the storytelling and the product and the game being grow globally, which of course is an ICC objective. So I think it's absolutely imperative that the game is furthered at international level. There's more opportunity for fixtures, the halves of the big teams that. Even though I think they do a lot. I saw an article today, which Richard Gould, the ECB chief executive, had mentioned how much India travel and play other teams, which is good for the global game. And I think that is noted, but almost that revenue share of those top teams, 15 million in terms of the global game would make a huge difference for Netherlands and Scotland. And I think by right, in terms of performances, we've earned the right to have further investment, to have a more of a say at that level. As such, in terms of how we then achieve that from here, it's almost a bit of a myth in terms of what does that full member status look like? Well, what do we actually need to do? How many, what criteria do we need to fulfill? I think the actual adage of full membership and associate members for me is so archaic. Actually, for me, I would be looking to kind of scrub that associate member status, and almost like the FIFA style rankings in football in the World Cup. Angola still play, Brazil, or for example at the World Cup, they can still qualify. There's a meritocracy there to qualify for those tournaments. There's still other fixture lists which coexist with what is an absolute behemoth of a competition in terms of elite football. So it shows that it can be done. And I think that more equitable share of making sure that teams such as Scotland and the Netherlands are playing more consistently in world events against top teams, that can only help the game grow globally.
Have you had any direction on what four-member criteria is and how close Scotland theoretically are to becoming one?
Well, one of the things we're fortunate to have is our chief executive, Trudy Lindblade, is very well connected now. I think she sits on the World Cricket Connects committee, and I think that certainly be one for her to answer rather than myself. That's I would say kind of not at my pay grade at the moment, but I sincerely hope that the conversations that are happening and tend to be kind of more kind of informal, I would suggest at the moment, are positive in what that looks like for full member stations for Scotland. But I'd like to still go back to my previous point and say that actually it shouldn't be a discussion in terms of whether or not we deserve to be given that accreditation. I think we need to look far deeper in terms of actually what's best for the world game. But from our perspective, we need more fixtures. We need significant more funding than we've got. We want to be able to treat our players as elite athletes, pay them as such, make sure they kind of travel as such. They've got a schedule which is befitting of them, and ultimately, then from a performance perspective, I think we can become far more ruthless rather than actually the narrative that I've fed back in terms of we haven't qualified for a World Cup, but actually we've done pretty well in that competition, and that doesn't really sit well with my kind of competitive nature. But I think it's important then to reflect, actually what we're coping with, and that sits quite nicely in terms with our current narrative from a strategy which is about creating sustainable success in performance. I think we can't be expected to be performing so well with the resources that we've got.
Steve, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating stuff, and best of luck for the year ahead. Next up, Lauren Winfield-Hill on the first week of Tier 1 cricket. Lauren, we're speaking the day after a new era of English cricket began, the launch of Tier 1 county cricket, and it was a really good first round of games, an epic tie and a amazing finish between Surrey and Somerset, with Amanda J. Wellington hitting 16 off her first four as Somerset chased down 31 from their last 10. So an amazing start on the field. But more generally, how do you feel about the start of Tier 1? From the outside, it's looked like the engagement's been really strong and there's been really good buy-in from county fans who maybe haven't been to much domestic women's cricket before.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of finally aligning the men's and the women's county systems, isn't it? I think we've tinkered with it forever, and now it's got a real identity under one club, under one banner. And I think that's what we found is the members who support the club are now supporting the women. I think there's more people probably seeing it just another game of cricket, that they get to support the badge, the team that they follow, rather than it be like men's cricket, women's cricket. I think having all the England, a large majority of the England players has made it more competitive, brought teams closer together. Like, just using that result as an example, I don't necessarily think Somerset at times have always competed, but you put Heather Knight in there and then you're trumping, probably one of the stronger teams on paper. So, when you have the England players available, all the teams get closer together. There's less disparity between the top teams and the bottom teams because, if you've got one or two international players and they make large contributions, the gap gets closed quite significantly, and the standard goes up, the interest goes up, the support goes up. So, yeah, there was a couple of shock ones, in terms of probably the Hampshire-Warwickshire game, the Lancs beating. I mean, we're having another stinker. It's like the World Cup. Every team that we've said we think will be gone this year, I think they lost, didn't they? We said Surrey and Notts, and they're both lost. So what on earth do we know? But yeah, like, unreal for the comp. Like, what a great start.
Yeah, so good. I mean, that Warwickshire-Hampshire game, epic tie. Rana Southby hit 72. for Hampshire in the first team, batting at 5. I know that she's been pigeonholed a bit as a specialist keeper over the years, but it's good to see her batting closer to the top of the order. And then, the Warwickshire tail did really well to sort of keep into the game after being 1-5-6 for 7, and then a last ball run out from Bouchier to tie the game. Amazing scenes there. And then that Somerset game, we got a question in from Gary, who asked, if we confiscate her passport now, how long would it be until Amanda Jade Wellington qualifies for England? She was so good in the game with ball initially, but then with the bat at the end. And that sorry team has 6 internationals in their top 7. And I guess the other thing that was really nice was, sure, a lot of the England players did really well, but there were also standout performances from players who maybe haven't attracted that much attention before. So Knight puts on 122 for the first wicket for Somerset alongside 21-year-old Emma Corney, who's probably not as well known as most of her teammates. I wanted to ask you about the end of this game, which was mad. 31 off 10, Somerset do it in the end, and Amanda Jade Wellington was the main reason for this. She hit her first 4 balls for 4. For people who haven't watched it, you might watch the replay of it and think you're watching the same ball a lot, because the first 3 balls in particular were basically the same shot. You had a ring field in the offside, no one on the boundary, and she gave herself a bit of room and basically cut it through the infield and sent it on its way to the fence. Surrey had a plan and really stuck to it, even though it wasn't going to plan. And I wonder, with your experience as a skipper, how often do you veer away from plan A in the moment when you're seeing it and sensing maybe actually it's not working right now? How much flexibility should you have on the field in those moments of the death?
Yeah, I think, if you've got to quickly assess whether you've misexecuted or the plan's not working, I think there's a difference. But I think actually the execution, wasn't, Rhiannon McDonald actually got it up in the block hole, pace on delivery. She was clearly trying to bowl Yorkers, but Amanda J. Wellington was pretty much giving herself a foot outside leg stump every time and just using the pace through the offside. And I think, you do that once and you go, all right, fair play. And then you see it twice and you think, okay, well, I think the plan's not working, especially pace on. I think to someone like Amanda Jade Wellington, she scores quite frequently behind square. So I thought it was an interesting plan in the first place. And I would have, to be honest, thought Rhiannon McDonald-Gay would have had a little bit more intel on Wello from obviously Oval Invincibles. And she is someone that uses the pace a lot. She's very good behind square. She ramps. She's actually a real pain to bowl at. But I think but having said that, she's not one of the, she's not going to probably hit you out the park consistently down the ground. So I was surprised that they didn't go keep her up, pace off, get one out on the offside, 3 out on the leg side, get fine leg up, or just bowl slow deliveries wide. And you can get square leg and fine leg up and say, if you want to get right across your stumps from the wide line, then good luck to you. It did look like quite a small boundary, so it's always hard to tell without dimensions and knowing short side, long side. I wonder if obviously the leg side was the long side in that scenario. So they were trying to almost hide one side of the field. But yeah, it did see, I was the same. I sort of watched the highlights package and I actually thought I was like, has it got stuck? Are we seeing, are we seeing the same shot over and over? And then I was like, oh no, that's slightly different. And that one's gone out point. The other one went in front of point. To be honest, 50 over cricket, like me personally, I wouldn't be that pre-planned. I think it's more how the conditions and how the game plays out in terms of adapting in the moment. But I do think, it becomes a T20 pretty quickly in that scenario, doesn't it? And I think that's where your T20 skills and your T20 thinking comes to the forefront in terms of being adaptable. And like often we sort of speak about not bowling 3 balls the same in a row in T20s. And that was probably a prime example of, okay, you can bowl a couple of deliveries the same, but if it's not working, you go 3 in a row, you're getting hurt. So fair play to Wello. She's under pressure. She delivers, I think you see it with the ball, with the bat, sometimes with a rogue specky from nowhere. She's that entertainer where she thrives on that.
The other team, as you say, that we tipped it didn't go well in week 1 was the Blaze. They scored 234 from their 50. Catherine Bryce top scored with 70. Georgia Elwys 49. And then Lancashire chased it down pretty easy in the end, 2-3-5 for 2 from 45 overs. Good to see Emma Lamb in the runs, 130 not out, and with 3 wickets at the ball. She's an interesting player in that 2 or 3 years ago, she was quite firmly in the England setup, but now only age 27 seems out of it. And we now know that Charlotte Edwards, the England coach, is putting a lot of emphasis on performance in domestic cricket. So it's a real statement performance from Emma Lamb in week 1.
Yeah, she's sort of been a bit forgotten. She's almost that forgotten player, hasn't she, Lammy? She's, John Lewis obviously didn't favour her in terms of under his reign. She pretty much didn't really play at all, did she? She sort of played initially and then very quickly was out of the fold, and she has been a bit forgotten about. I think she's been quiet since she initially left the England stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's always like, it's crazy, isn't it? You think, oh, you write players off after a year or 2 years, and it's like there's still so much time for her to come back, to put some performances in. Like, it's a pretty blank canvas and fair game for everyone at the minute. It seems if you put in strong performances in consistently, you'll be looked at. But yeah, she sort of has dropped off the boil a bit. Like, interesting, she was quite a high pick in the 100, and she hasn't really had a lot of success in the 100. She was pretty good a couple of years ago, but was very quiet last year. So I just wonder if a bit of time back with a domestic team, having that consistency around the same people, the same coaches, a pre-season under a belt. I know she spent a bit of time out in New South Wales training over there. Yeah, I just wonder if she's in a different frame of mind and feeling confident again. I think it takes a bit of time as well to bounce back after you've been dropped. Like, everyone's sort of different. Some people almost get that fire in their belly straight away where they're like, well, I'll prove that you got it wrong. Whereas she's taken that little bit longer to bounce back. But it's good to see that she's amongst the runs and, well and truly like in the frame again.
You've done a bit of detective work. You looked at the way that the Blaze lined up. Very interestingly, Amy Jones is opening the batting. Do you think that this might be the start of something more significant with her at the top of the order?
Yeah, I'm like Lauren Poirot at the minute. I've been digging. It was actually, I should have put my leather jacket on and my flat cap.
Get you a magnifying glass.
Yeah. I do like a flat cap actually. But no, I saw her on an internal game. I know they only got one innings in a couple of weeks back at Loughborough. And Jonesy had opened with Tammy in that, and then obviously opened again for Notts. I don't know. I'm just thinking this can't be a fluke. You don't just suddenly go from being a middle order player to elevated to open, both in that internal game and obviously then for Notts. So I just wonder if that's a little mastermind from Lottie early in terms of there's not a lot of spots available really when you look at it. If you look at the next year or so, we know that Heather Knight's still a world-class player. Just because she's not captain, nothing really changes. Nat's a world-class performer. Tammy's probably due, but in 50 over cricket, Tammy Beaumont's record is remarkable. So yes, and you've got Danny Wyatt, who's pretty solid and has performed really well the last 18 months. So there's not a lot of openings in terms of spots that could potentially can be potentially looking over their shoulder, apart from in that middle order. That sort of like 6 role if Jonesy was to pop up, or opening. And I think, I don't know if this is like creates a bit of a hole for Paige Schofield and an easier entry point for her into international cricket. It could be absolutely way off the mark and they just want Jonesy to go and have longer to bat and make bigger contributions.
Yeah, we looked it up before we recorded. She's not opened the batting for England in any format for 5 years. So
yeah,
this is a big change.
I like she's obviously done it and she can do it, and she's especially in one-day cricket, she's played really well over the last year or so. And I just wonder if it gets a bit more out of a senior player than sort of not hiding down at 5-6, but against a lot of teams, you don't have as much opportunity to make big contributions. And then is that an easier entry point for a Paige Schofield? I feel like we've got more middle order players banging the door down at the minute than we have openers. You look at, Paige Schofield. We can't forget about Alice Capsey. Holly Armitage, like they all bat from 3 to 6. So if you look at, the next crop of players and the gaps that could open up, if you shift Jonesy up to open, then does that create a more natural couple of holes for some of these players who are on the fringes? Or we could just be massively reading into things and she's just open to give us, get a bit of time in the middle.
Either way, I think your point about where the gaps in the team is bang on. And Schofield has done everything she can do really to bang down the door. But at the moment, if people stay in the same positions, there's not an obvious spot for her to come the side. So this is in theory how you do it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is we've obviously seen Paige open and have pretty good success, when she did it in the 100. But predominantly she's a middle order player, I think that was always if you're good enough, you can bat anywhere. Genuinely you can bat anywhere. But you're trying to give someone the best chance most often of doing something that they're most suited to and they're best at. And she's done that more so and more consistently in the middle order. She could open for England. But if you're debuting and she's debuted now, but if you're trying to forge your way into international cricket and you're doing a role that you've probably done 10 times in the last 5 years, or you're doing a role that you've done 95% of the time you've played, it's going to be a damn sight easier to make your way in international cricket doing a role that you're more familiar with. I feel like I've properly banged the Schofield drum the last few episodes, but she starts at 6. Heather Knight's not going to be around forever. Nat Sciver-Brunt might not play every single series for the next 2 or 3 years. She might do, but she might not. Heather might not go for more than a year or two. So you start at 6, then you could pop up to 4 or 3, and then you've got Capsy that can come in as well, give her a bit of time to, the senior players, are sort of drip fed out, and then these youngsters come in these spots. So it sort of makes sense theoretically to do it like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think sometimes in ODI cricket and maybe T20 cricket as well, actually, if you leave the gap the other side, so at 7, I think that's actually quite a hard place for someone to come in, because normally that's when you're managing an innings, you have to manage the tail, and that might not be something you've done a lot of if you tend to bat higher up in domestic cricket. So I think there's a lot of logic in that. The final game of the round was Durham versus Essex, and it was a handsome win for Durham. Essex bowled out for 177. Phoebe Turner took 4 for 33. Katie Levick took 3 for 28, and Durham chased it down pretty easily, actually very easily. They chased it down with 17 overs remaining. Susie Bates, 93 not out. Holly Armitage, the skipper, 64 not out. I wanted to ask you about Phoebe Turner. I don't think we've talked about her lots on the pod before. Leading wicket taker in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy last year. And then with the bat, scored 100 in Durham's last pre-season game on their tour of Zimbabwe. She's only 21, and I don't think she's been picked up in the 100 in any year before. A former teammate of yours, for people who haven't seen a lot of Phoebe Turner, tell us about her.
Yeah, she's a great character, Phoebe. She absolutely loves it. She's such a student of the game. But she's great because she offers something with everything. She's a handy bat. She's a good ball striker as well. She hits a very clean ball. But I think that her biggest strength is that the seam movement that she extracts, and she doesn't often take the new ball, and she's able to do that with an older ball. And I feel like it's so much harder as a batter to face seam bowling than it is swing bowling. If you've got somebody that can hit the seam, she gets nice and tall at the crease, and you can nip it back or nip it away. You get genuine nicks where people have just played the line and nicked it through to the keeper or gone back through the gate. And she's got a good pace. She bowls a heavy ball. She hits the splice. She can bowl a bumper. She can bowl a back of the hand. Yeah, and I think she's just going to get better and better because, like I say, she absolutely loves it. She works really hard. And she can offer something in all areas of the game, really. But I think it's that ability, she's a bit like a Crossy where she just hammers a length. She presents a really nice seam and just lets it talk off a good length. And that's sort of been her biggest strength, really. But she's got properly good players out last year, and doing it again, continuing this year. So yeah, I think she's definitely someone that's got huge promise. I wouldn't be getting too giddy too soon, but I think she's got all the attributes. She's probably like a bit of a female Liam Plunkett, like that kind of bowler where you come in, hit the splice, you got a few change-ups, but can make a real impact through the middle. Where I think, yeah, like I said, she's done it last year, and then she's continued that this year. She's a good cricketer, really, really handy cricketer.
I think one of the nice things about the new setup is that we could just talk about players being really exciting and not always have to talk about them in like an England conversation. It's like there's a domestic system that really matters, that loads of people really care about in its own right, and not everything has to be, well, what does this mean for England down the line, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, there's no doubt about it. She's got the potential to be able to do it, but she's 21 and she's had 1 year in professional cricket. Let her go. Let her bang that down for 2 or 3 years, and we'll be having the conversation then. And, then it is genuine of, well, how do you get her in?
Cool. That's everything for today. Cheers, Lauren. Lots of exciting stuff from week 1 in the new county system. We look forward to seeing what happens in week 2.
Thanks, mate.
Ben, tell us about the finish to the qualifier.
Yeah, well, there's 2 bits to talk about here, really, as they kind of prune the teams away. Let's save the good stuff for later and start with still what was the pretty good stuff.
Start with the bad stuff?
Well, no, it's still pretty good, to be honest. The Scotland-Ireland game was a classic, as this tournament has been full of. I think it's one of the best tournaments I've ever kind of been aware of in terms of, like, obviously the overall jeopardy, but also just the number of absolutely brilliant games. You have all these brilliant players and all of them playing to their potential as well. There's been no shortage of admiration for Catherine Bryce on the podcast, and this was actually maybe the game of her career, to go with actually the other game against Ireland in the T20 World Cup qualifier.
So give us the context for this game. So Scotland, basically they're outsiders. They needed to win this game, but also have a pretty significant net run rate swing.
Yeah, possibly, but I think they would have hoped just to win it, and then actually they might then just sneak in on net run rate if West Indies maybe flame out against Thailand, going for a net run rate swing or something like that happens. Basically, they just need to win to stay in the hunt, and then kind of let other stuff take care of themselves. Bryce makes a brilliant 130. That I think the highest score in the Women's World Cup qualifier ever from any nation. Scotland put up 268, which looks like plenty, and then the chase is just one of those brilliant chases that kind of goes back and forth. There's a century opening stand, then a few wickets, then another sort of mini stand, and then another few wickets. At 209 for 7, you think Scotland have won it. Then there's Laura Delaney, former captain. She makes a half century, puts on a stand with the number 9, gets them up to 262, so they're 7 runs away, and then 2 wickets fall. Bryce is bowling the last over, and actually they need 2 off the last 3 balls, and the bat doesn't hit the ball again, but Ireland still win it. It goes bowled, leg by, and that's it. Scotland are out. So absolutely brilliant. On Bryce, by the way, quickly, I think, I don't know enough about Scottish sport overall, but I think she must be in contention to be Scotland's greatest ever sportswoman. I Googled...
Catherine Granger, surely.
Well, okay, to playing in a proper team sport, basically.
That's a big slight against rowing.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Which I'm happy to let you do.
Basically, I Googled...
I don't know how many rowers listen to the podcast.
I'm not an expert on Scottish sport across all sports, but I Googled Scotland's greatest ever sportswoman, and the list that I read, number 1 was someone who played football for Italy but was Scottish, and so that can't be number 1. So I think Bryce has to be up there basically for everything that she's done. Anyway, so that was Scotland out, unfortunately. So it left it to a 3-team shootout between Pakistan, Bangladesh, and West Indies. Bangladesh just needed to win, or else hope that their net run rate stayed above West Indies. West Indies needed Bangladesh to lose and then complete something improbable against Thailand. Bangladesh did lose, and then West Indies did complete something almost complete something completely improbable. Where
well, I looked at the scorecard for this game. So from a timeline point of view, this Thailand-West Indies game was the last one, right?
Mm-hmm,
so
yes.
West Indies knew what they needed to do. So when I looked at the scorecards, without looking at the table, I presumed West Indies must have qualified given the scorecard. So West Indies chased down, bear in mind this is a 50-over competition, they chased down 167 in 10.5 overs. But that wasn't enough.
No, it wasn't enough. And it's one of those where the amount of runs that you clear the opposition by is also key with, giving you that extra little few balls to do it. And especially because Thailand had no reason to keep West Indies' run rate down. Like if it was Thailand's net run rate West Indies were trying to overtake, then you might have had a situation where they bowl, say, a deliberate wide and then the game's finished, but you're 1 run above them rather than 6 runs above them, as can be the case. But so originally it looked like West Indies needed to do it in 10 overs. They ended up doing it in 10.5 overs, but the real crux is it's Taylor at the crease at the end there, and if she goes 4 and then 6, West Indies qualify, but she hits one just too well, it goes for 6, and she's distraught, everyone's distraught, and that's them out by literally
So
the barest of margins.
they knew that
they
she
absolutely
needed to hit a 4
knew.
and then a 6, not a 6 and then a 4.
Yeah, they were very, very on
Wow.
top of it, which we've seen teams
Which
not
actually
be
is
on top
actually
of it.
rare,
Yeah.
right, in these competitions.
Yeah, Afghanistan in that
wow.
situation. But yeah, I mean, Hayley Matthews, who, has had she's she would be one of the best cricketers on show if she were at the World Cup proper, let alone at a qualifying event. And she hit 70 off 29, 11 fours, 2 sixes. And yeah, it's just not quite enough. And the net run rate thing you say, it is interesting that such a big win isn't enough to take your net run rate up that high enough. I mean, Bangladesh did also have a very big win over Thailand, I think their biggest win ever. But it's a weird kind of net run rate complication thing where actually teams like to chase in net run rate situations because they like to know exactly what they have to do, which to me is a bit weird because if you have to keep a team below a certain run target, you also know exactly what you have to do.
But I think it's more that it feels like you have more control.
Yeah.
Whereas it's easier in theory to chase something really quickly. It's harder to bat really quickly for 50 overs.
That's true, yes. But then you do, I guess, but you still at the halfway stage know that, say you make 300, you have to keep them to 150. You're like, okay, we're defending 150 here. So you still need, but yeah, that is a fair point. But although it's harder to bat for a long period of time, because you've done it for a longer period of time, it gives you a bigger boost in your net run rate. It's actually a big factor is actually how long you bat at that rate for, not just how fast you bat for in a win. So it's the fact that, it's only 10.5 overs worth of overs batted they've scored at that rate for, so it doesn't actually increase their overall tournament run rate by that much, despite scoring at 50.5 and over.
That is everything for today's show. Cheers, Ben, and thanks to Steve and Lauren earlier in the show. That is everything for this week's podcast. We'll be back after next week's midweek round of fixtures in the Tier 1 structure.